Hey everybody, welcome to the commentary for some speed art here. This is George Jiparu, head artist, who am I kidding, the only artist of Third Level Productions. Me and my buddy and co-creator Chris Garza do a webcomic called How Can I Help You? You can find us at howcanihelpyoucomic.com. I am doing some unsolicited fan art here, sort of a gift for Chris of ComicTropes. If you're not familiar with Chris's work, he has an outstanding YouTube channel. I'll post the link here in the description, where he takes a look at various idiosyncrasies, tendencies. I guess we'll call them tropes. Not always, more sometimes it's just pointing out stylistic choices, themes. Taking a look at storylines, famous and obscure. The obscure stuff is some of the most fun. His knowledge is impressive, and he takes a fun and interesting look. He's not afraid to pull punches with some of the stuff that we've, know and love, grew up with. He certainly, though, has an affection for the medium, and he treats it with respect, even if he pokes some fun at it, which is really what it's all about, right? We love and respect comics and want to see them prosper and grow. Um, Still, they're not without their flaws. And I guess that's what brings me here to this topic. One of the more popular shows that he did was his initial episode on Rob Liefeld. If you're not familiar with Rob, he is a famous comic books artist. He's a co-creator of Deadpool, Cable as well. He was probably most prolific and well known in the early 90s. He was doing New Mutants, maybe even from the late 80s for Marvel, and that became ultimately X-Force. X-Force number one, I believe, is still the second most popular comic or second most high-selling comic of all time after Chris Claremont, Jim Lee, X-Men number one. Launched at roughly the same time. Rob, is popular, very famous comic book artist, and not always for the right reasons. So I wanted to get this out up front that this is this piece, this video. None of it is intended to bash Rob Liefeld. I think Rob's got enough flack over the course of the years, and this is not to pile on. It's not what it's about, and we'll get into that a little bit more here in a bit. Um, but just to sort of touch into the process here, because we're already a couple minutes in, I just using photo reference. I use myself. You'll see the dashing gentleman in the blue plaid shirt from earlier is me. Me and Chris have similar body type, I guess. So myself as the subject matter for photo reference made enough sense. This is Chris himself and his character. I assume that's Chris in a box covered with aluminum foil and a bucket of some sort on his head as Infotron. Infotron is his, I don't want to call him trusty sidekick because he's made a couple of guest appearances, but he comes through and gives Chris raw data. He actually spits it out of his mouth like a big computer from the 60s, right? The size of a wall. He is being treated as a separate entity here, his own man, I guess, his own robots, so to speak. Just trying to get the likenesses down, not being completely religious to it, but I wanted it to be instantly recognizable as Chris and as Infotron. Getting back to Rob Liefeld a little bit here, though, because I want to make sure that we're up front on this. I learned a lot from Rob Liefeld, maybe by reverse osmosis in a lot of cases, because you pick up on what you like about somebody. I think in their work, you try to emulate it. And I think you maybe try to identify stuff that you want to stay away from. And, looking at Rob's stuff, watching the Comic Tropes episode that Chris did, it makes you want to be a better artist. I told myself, man, I don't want to end up on Comic Tropes, at least not like that. And I think Chris would be the first also to tell you that he wasn't trying to bash Rob Liefeld either. But I think it's important that we take a look at his work. Was known for a lot of extremes in his art, exaggerated to say the least, anatomy, proportions, tendency to avoid drawing feet, or when he would draw them, he'd draw them tiny, avoiding, complex perspective, characters in relation to each other in deep space. So it's a few things like that that I always wanted to be mindful of in my work, that I would avoid and put everything in correctly. Come up with unique, original layouts for my work. Tell stories that nobody else had, at least in not the exact same way they had. So what we actually are missing a chunk here, where I'm tightening up those digital pencils. As far as the work process here, I got all the photo reference screenshots right from Chris's show, and did my rough drawing in Photoshop CS3, nothing fancy. What got cut out is that I tightened them up. I brought in some cans, some photos of Bud Light cans. I traced them right into the drawing. I guess you could call that a sort of a digital light boxing. If you guys have a problem with tracing, I guess we'll say farewell now. No hard feelings. I get it. I'll tell you what, though. Your favorite comic book artist? Probably tracing too. Maybe not a guy like Mignola, where, those kind of details would maybe only slow the art down because of all the gorgeous negative space that he uses so well. But in this case, it was not photorealistic by any means, graphic, of course, but I wanted realistic proportions. It wasn't done as a cartoon, which is what I was initially thinking. I wanted to do it more like a comic book cover. So tightened it up, put the cans in, traced over them. They actually didn't print out very well here, so I end up coming in and doing some digital cleanup on them later. So I print out the pencils on some Bristol board, either in a light blue or a very light gray. I did gray here on this one, save some ink. Uh, Tightened it up with pencils. I didn't have the ability to actually film me do the pencils and inks. I would have loved to have done that. Could not find the SD card on the camcorder. Had no special rig for the phone, and I wasn't going to sit there and hold it, for 2 hours while I did this. So I just filmed a couple of the stages of the process, roughing in the pencils, tightening the pencils up, some inks, and then this here is done, just about done with the inks in there. I touch a lot of it up digitally. It is part of the hybrid process. Here you can see I scan it in. If that's not your cup of tea, I get that too. It wasn't mine initially. I was, old school, very much so. If you're gonna do anything like that, light box it right on a piece of Bristol board, so you've got a final finished piece of art that you could frame, hang up, sell, whatever. And that's great. I like to have finished art as much as I can. I usually use a hybrid flow and sometimes a purely digital flow for the webcomic, just because I save a lot of time. Nobody's asking me for original art at this point in time. It's more like a commission thing that, a nice, you know, good-looking piece of original art would come. But for the comics, something like this in print medium, and you'll see this is not unusual at all here in the industry, mainstream and indie comics. A lot of it is done digitally, if not 100%. I was slow to come to it, but I didn't want to leave myself behind. So I had to, use YouTube. Thanks, by the way, guys, for teaching myself a lot of that, and I think it's paid off. So I recommend it. Don't get left behind. So what I'm doing here, plugged it back in. You can see some of the tighter pencils underneath in those layers. You can see the Bud Light cans that I brought out, cut, and what I'm going to be doing here is getting the inks in for these Bud Light cans. Played around with a couple of different brushes. I didn't use anything fancy here. I just tried to mirror the look of the actual inks. Um, I wanted to get the logos right. This is not one that I wanted to just write in my own handwriting, Bud Light. It would have worked, but I don't think it would have worked as well. It just I don't think the payoff would have been as nice. I wanted instantly recognizable. Yeah, that's what I did. Um, just coming in here with the path tool. Sometimes I'll just use the ink tool if I want a smoother line, complex curve. Use that tool. The pen tool there, instruct that path. Um, Making some adjustments. You'll see me do that quite a bit here. I don't want to give up on anything, without a fight. I want to make it look right. You'll see with his hair a little bit when I finish with the cans, start cleaning up some of the the stray ink lines, things like that. I wanted to clean up the hair because it looked too greasy. It didn't look like how Chris's hair looks. He's got more of a feathery ginger thing going on. So I wanted to get that detail right. There's artistic license all over the place here, and I'll touch on probably some of it. But and I think that's okay. I think there's true to the source material with artistic license, and I think there's maybe taking um, some maybe too much liberty. I think that's part of where we're going here with the theme is Rob Liefeld. Getting back to his stuff, he's certainly well known in the comics industry as a bit of a goat, and I don't mean that as the greatest of all time. Um, and I don't want to pile on to him. His work has certainly improved. I think Chris actually did an episode about it. Chris, by the way, in terms of what he's doing here, the setup will oftentimes subject himself to some sort of torturous display for his viewership when he identifies the tropes. He'll look at he'll identify the tropes up front of whatever the subject material is before reviewing an individual issue or maybe a story arc. And he'll oftentimes drink, take shots. He'll drink exotic beers. He drank, I think, for the second Rob Liefeld episode, he was drinking like awful flavored sodas, like ranch and zit flavored sodas, things like that. So he's always taking one for the team. Figured I'd give back a little bit. He'll eat chili peppers. He started off with a bell pepper and went up to, I think, ghost pepper every time he ran into a trope. So the idea of this one here is that he reached through a Rob Liefeld comic. He's found so many tropes that he is now um, three sheets to the wind. He's sweating. He's got a bunch of empty beer cans in his lap. And Infotron here is consoling him. Gonna let him know it's gonna be all right. I wanted to make it a comic book cover sort of format because I wanted to throw a logo in there. I figured it just would tie it all together, particularly because you could throw the colors in the logo and make a bit of a color scheme. I didn't really have much of one in mind when doing the line art. I always think composition first, and just kind of go from there, thinking black and white terms or gray values. And once I get it digital and get into color mode, then I start thinking about how to tie that together. I don't know if I actually really achieved it. The finished product that you see at the end of the video might not necessarily be the finished product that I send into Chris. I might continue to tweak it here and there. Saturation levels, minor stuff like that. But I think stuff that makes a difference. You don't want to just throw color up there. You want to, have it tie in the subject matter, set a mood, draw interest to certain places, deflect interest from others. So, you want to treat it as its own separate thing. Some artists, probably much better than I have, will think about that stuff in advance. I know Mignola does. He's so famous for his black and white negative space. Um, and but he's always thinking color as he draws and makes those notes available to his colorist, Dave Stewart. Draw a lot of inspiration from them, mostly with the webcomic. This is more, I don't know, I guess it's just my style. It's the best that I put out there, or near the best, for time constraints. You gotta, a perfectionist, yeah, but to a point, because for print, and you gotta let it go, move on to the next subject, next project. Um, so you get it to a point where you don't hate it. Maybe it's stuff you really like about it, and sign it, send it, and move on to the next one. Here, what I'm doing is I didn't necessarily want it to be a photorealistic texture for Infotron. I wanted to make sure that he looked like metal, but maybe not necessarily aluminum foil covered. Maybe he'd just be a banged up robot. I leave that to the viewer, I guess. Um, this is some artistic license with his shirt. I think he usually is wearing a bowler shirt, I guess is what it's called. And it's got a black collar and black down the middle, and you'll usually see the color, on the sides and sleeves. I reversed that here just because I didn't want Chris to get washed out in here. I didn't think there was quite enough color, particularly because it's a blank background. You'll see me struggle with the color in the background a little bit here and there, tweak it a lot. Infotron is Has very neutrals, sort of color scheme. I pushed the blue in them as much as I could. I actually left out a chunk here where I was doing flats and experimenting with other things in color. How do I do a more realistic, sort of texture and color, or leave it a little bit more graphic. I decided more graphic. It just worked better. Doing color holds here, basically coming in and coloring over the blacked ink line art to make it as if you drew that in with a color ink. I try not to go too crazy with that. I think you want to use it strategically. I think maybe you'll see comics nowadays with too much color holds and Photoshop effects. I want to keep that to a minimum. I still want to use the computer as an advantage, as the useful tool that it is, but I don't want to go overboard. Um, I didn't want to make it to look like something that you could never possibly achieve in reality, or that's has too many lighting effects and lens flares and things like that. Um, I wanted to keep it clean, and I think I'm actually rather proud of how we pulled that off here on the eyes. I add a little bit more glow in some After Effects later on. Color hold here for the black so that it's not perfectly black. He's got a bit of a smile. I think his slit is actually more straight across his face, but depending on what angle you look at him, he could be in a frown if you're looking up at him, or I had him kind of leaning in towards Chris. He's tilted forward, so it turns into a bit of a smile. The his arm here, I think it's the material, the color is not a whole lot different from the aluminum foil, but treated it on its own. I struggle with the arm a little bit, as you'll see through the video. I tried different things with it. I thought ultimately it was just too much black, and I think it distracted, so I do a color hold over the interior of his arm. I leave the black outline, around the arm, and I come in on the, where you see the, I don't know what you call it, corrugation, maybe not the right word, but the sort of slinky pattern to how the arm is set up. Um, just filling in basic colors. Sometimes I'll kind of flatten everything and then adjust colors as I go. Sometimes I'll pick a spot. Sometimes I'll pick a character. In this one, I wanted to get Infotron down. He had metal and a lot of shining effects. He was going to take more work, and I wanted to make sure that I pulled that off up front. So then I got him in and turned my attention towards Chris. Um, Chris, pretty simple, just kind of flatted it in. I don't do a separate flats layer. I experiment with that sometimes. That's probably the more industry standard way. But I kind of flat it in and then color on top of it as I go. I'm not doing a whole lot of, effects and value changes and gradation. I'm not doing a whole lot here, so didn't really think it was necessary. Did a color hold on the beard. I thought that his beard is, kind of that gingery sort of lighter beard. I wanted to make sure that that came across. Um, I play with the glasses a little bit. I don't think I got the shape of the glasses down. I don't know where I was looking here, but they kind of come off as more of like a retro look. The bridge comes straight across his face like that, and that's not really how it quite looks. So that's probably a detail that I settled for here, but will ultimately probably change before I send it in. Maybe not. Who knows? I might have moved on to the next thing by the time I post this. Who knows? Um, but kind of getting back to, you want to make it right, but to a point where you got to let it go. Where is that point? Where is that at? How faithful do you have to be to that? I think everybody's got that sort of point. Some people get to it a lot quicker, and that's sort of part of their genius is they're able to get to that point. They're master draftsmen like Jim Lee, Golden, Neil Adams. These guys are, Neil Adams maybe a little bit more deconstructed, I guess, these days, but still brilliant work. And you want to get that right. You want to nail it, but you also have to be mindful that it's time to move on to the next piece. We don't have the luxury of spending years on a book, on a page, on a cover. Um, Here, just throwing in. says his eyes are bloodshot. Just trying to sell that. When I throw the glasses effects in there later, that gets washed out a little bit. I have to come back and kind of redo it. But yeah, where is that point? I think you should kind of know it when you see it, and um, I think you push it forward as you improve because you're able to get to it quicker. You know, through trial and error, you figure out what works, what doesn't work. You're always trying to play around, push yourself, make yourself better. I don't think you should become stagnant ever in your art or really in anything that you're doing. Um, and yeah, a lot of those lessons are learned from Rob Liefeld. And I think it sounds funny, but you know, it's a guy that again, I'm not here to bash. This guy sold, you know, a million plus, you know, copies. He's put together far more comic pages than I have, and was did so much more so, you know, at an earlier age than I ever did. So it's a ton of respect for him. You know, he's out there doing his thing. Again, don't really want to pile on. Maybe kind of tough to believe that with all the stuff in the background, but it's also meant to be funny. I don't know. Can't say he's embraced it. I don't know the man. I never really met him. But I think humility is important because if we can't learn from mistakes, we can't improve. So I was trying to push that. The hair, you know, I worked on the hair a bunch of times. You probably see me did that, came in. It was maybe a little bit more photorealistic, a bunch of individual strands. Didn't like that. Again, wanted to keep it a little bit more feathery because he's kind of a ginger. So left the hair a little bit more open for color. Um, Coming in here and gonna do, yeah, block in his shirt again. Bit of a license there. Color maybe should have been on the outside. I threw it on the inside. I wanted that warmth to stay in the center of the image. There's not much on Infotron. He's got the red eyes, so I wanted to nail those. Give Chris a similar color shirt. Maybe a little bit of the red in his eyes, a little bit of the reddish orange in his hair, and so that your eyes sort of followed, Infotron to Chris to, down his shirt to the can that he's holding in his hands. And just to have the sticky notes in the background as a way to have some color pop, to give it I mean, it's a background. It's not much of a background anyway because he films in front of a wall and he's got some lithographs, I guess you could say, printouts, whatever, on the back, and he sticks the stickies right up on there. So it's sort of an attempt at putting a middle ground in here. Um, just to push the depth a little bit. I'll be adding a shadow behind them shortly. As far as this garish green color, you won't see that on the finished piece. By the way, you've been looking at it the last couple of minutes. I like to throw in a color that I know I will not actually use in the piece, usually something very gaudy, just so that it's easy when you come in color to see if there's any areas that you miss, particularly on, areas that would be white, that would normally match, I guess, a background in Photoshop or something like this, where they're essentially in front of I think it's sort of an off-white yellowish wall. Um, Doing some color holds on the sticky notes as far as what should be, color hold and what shouldn't be. I guess you got to color it like you see it. I use quite a bit of it here, but I think it's subtle. I don't know if it's necessarily quantity, but quality, and you could still go for quantity as long as you maintain the quality. I think I do color holds in the tape. I think a translucent, transparent, semi-transparent, something with very low opacity, something paper thin or paper itself. I think should get the color hold. I think if you have the certain textures, like the metallic texture, if you've got some light on it, I think should get a color hold. I think I play around with the color hold on his nose. I didn't quite like it. I thought it was maybe too gimmicky. I think just leave that black. I do a bit of a color hold on the cans to make them shine, to pop a little bit, little effects. But I don't like doing a whole lot of that, or at least not making it gaudy or distracting. You want to make it subtle. I think add and enhance and not take away. by being, excuse me, becoming a distraction. So yeah, throwing in a drop shadow behind them. The more intense I made it, the more intense the light would be on them. Didn't want to wash them out. This is a bit of a license here too. I think his lighting is probably a little bit more above, whereas this is more centered right there, in the space between, Infotron's eyes and maybe the bottom of Chris's chin. So yeah, sure, there's a little bit of a license. There's nothing wrong with that. I think you need to add to the piece without making it distracting or completely inaccurate. The perspective, I use a lot of perspective grids. I use SketchUp, so a little bit more tracing. I usually trace my own models. But yeah, I'll use 3D modeling software to get the perspective right. I use a lot of grids. Sometimes I make myself. You'll see that much more in the webcomic, and you'll see that in the longer video that I did of the food truck. Perspective grids, SketchUp. It's a 3D modeling, computer-aided drafted programming that a lot of artists use for backgrounds, putting things in deep space, just posing things, and using as reference. Again, I don't want to be a slave to the photo reference. I think you want to use it to enhance, but you don't want to trace. It makes things stiff, or at least not trace excessively. I don't think you should be tracing the human form. I think it makes things stiff. Um, I don't think you definitely want to trace anybody else's layouts. You want to make sure that they're your own unique, original stuff. Um, yeah, here's me coming in back with the eyes. I think it actually turns out better this way because it's less of relying on the individual line work for the bloodshot eyes, the veins in the eyes, capillaries, whatever those are called, and just relying more on a color value. Keeps it a little bit more simple, a little bit more bold. Um, um, but uh, but yeah, you license use photo reference. You don't want to trace excessively. But for this one, I didn't use a perspective grid. I had a pretty good idea in my mind of the horizon line would be essentially in the center of the image, or well, with the logo on top. I guess it's the lower the dividing line between the lower 2/3 of the image. So I guess roughly at like Chris's chest, chin, and kind of went from there. I wasn't a slave to that. I think it looks like it's in perspective. I was mindful of that, particularly with the cans. If I get the cans right, and you see the tops of them appropriately, then it was sold. Um, Bud Light again, going in with the logo. I traced the outline of the logo, and what I do here is I just fill it in with black. It's easier to kind of block that in real quick, and then I lock the transparency on it, do a color hold. It's a dark blue because I know that's the drop shadow for it, and then I copy it and throw another one on top of it. Color that one white. You'll see I do something pretty similar for the logo as a guide later on. See again that garish green. It just helps to separate things for me easier than the white would. And it's fun. So whatever. If he looks like the Hulk, he looks like the Hulk for right now. Um, Wanted to make sure I got the logo out in front. You see, off initially it was sort of off to the right, and it left too much negative space there, and I didn't want to pass up an opportunity to get in, a good clean look at that Bud Light logo on that one particular can. So I threw it in. Um, yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of criticism. Maybe see it in the comments, hear it from you directly, and that's cool. Hey, let me have it. I want to improve. Um, I definitely do. So if you don't agree with the methods, or if you see somewhere I could have got better, particularly if there's some sort of Photoshop shortcut that you notice, I'm all ears for that stuff. I like being efficient. I like being detailed. I don't want to give up on stuff, but again, you want to be efficient, put the best product out there, send it and move on. What are we doing here? I think these are, oh, coming in with some highlight back through the shadow, giving it some visual interest, right? And then this is the color holes, like I mentioned earlier on the arm. I think it takes the busyness that was going on with his arm and it throws it into the back a little bit. I actually don't do that on the opposite side here because I figure it should be in the background. It acts to sort of frame Chris a little bit. And Chris, I think if he were, in reality in front of him, that there would be some shadow in there anyway. back there, particularly because of a strong central light source. So I think it still works. Threw a little bit of rosiness on his nose and in his cheeks. Added a couple of little shadows in the back of the sticky notes to give him some depth. And then here I borrow my own um, 90s style Marvel logo and UPC code. I think that's a UPC code from a Spider-Man graphic novel, if I remember correctly. If you look it up, you will actually see there's a real book out there for it. I don't know why. It's, maybe these techniques, or certainly these techniques wouldn't be used at that time, that this particular logo was being used, was being published by Marvel. See here, I think this is Uncanny 250. So no, the extensive Photoshop and digital drawing, and I'm sure none of that was used, or very little of it. But it's and as I sort of told Chris when I sent in the fan art, my little email, that this is what brought me into comics, and maybe it's an homage. I guess we'll call it an homage. And even down to the kind of color scheme, it sort of became instead of a blue and gold for the X-Men, sort of a purplish and gold, because purplish is maybe, I know it's the color of royalty traditionally, but it's a little bit more fun. Especially the shade that we use here. It's not an eggplant; it's a lighter one. So I think it gives it sort of a funny X-Men feel. Not quite as serious. And they mixed in a lot of different colors for their logos anyway, I guess, to go with with whatever the color scheme of the cover or whatever, they felt like doing that month. So that's the technique I use here. I block these in just as regular Arial font, closed in the spaces to make it nice and tight. Threw it in that same perspective. Again, you see me trace right over top of the X-Men logo. Didn't trace the X-Men logo. I traced um, the perspective lines essentially, so I could put my own logo in that exact same perspective. Not necessarily to swipe, but as an homage. I see it that way anyway. You could see it differently. And that's cool. That's perfectly cool. If you want, we'll part ways now. And best of luck to you, my friend. Um, I come back in and clean some of this up later. I try to save this thing and get rid of it like 3 or 4 times, and I come back a couple more to clean up a couple of things. The S on the logo, the little curve at the bottom seemed out of place to me, and I have to come back in and correct that. Um, I actually worked on the logo on a different page in Photoshop just because I didn't want all the clutter in the way. I knew roughly the dimensions I wanted, so it just gives me a nice free space to work on the logo. Logos can be a pain in the neck. They can be a little bit tedious, but I think they're fun and they really pay off. They make it look professional. That's what they're there for, right? To help sell the brand. And I wanted to make it look like something that you would see on the comic stands, maybe even buy. Um, I think it's really more of an old school Silver Age DC style cover where they give you maybe like a little snapshot of a scene that you would see in the book. They oftentimes had dialogue balloons. I know it's not unique to DC. Marvel did it too. I just think DC was you'd see maybe this kind of cover more often. But also on Marvel, and I think I pulled this right from the Uncanny 250 that I looked at for reference. They would tell you a little bit about what was going to be in the issue, featuring, this character from this group or a guest star in their own font and a tale or a journey into the Savage Land, something like that, just to kind of give you a little brief thing of what was going on there. And this one we're tying in Bud Light. Again, you may disagree with me. I think Bud Light is cheap. I think it tastes not good. I'm not a fan of it. I will actually pass up an opportunity to drink beer when there's the only thing is Bud Light, and I like drinking beer. Not in excess, but I do fancy a pint every now and again. And Bud Light is um, not my jam. Might be yours. Hey, it might even just be cheap. You might love the taste. You may love a Rob Liefeld comic and appreciate all the detail he puts into it, and that's cool. Um, but for me, what I'm trying to get across is that Bud Light is kind of cheap, and it's not a quality product. If they put more time and energy and quality into it, that would be a better product. And I think they have some out there on the market, specialty stuff. And is it better? Nah, I guess. Whatever you say. But it does what it's intended to do. It reaches the market that it's intended to reach. It sells. It makes money. So does Rob Liefeld. Um, you see, this was supposed to be the finishing shot, and it just didn't look right. Maybe a little bit too washed out. The white border around the Chris I loved, but it just didn't show up really well at that size. Zoomed in, it looked okay, but looking at it on a computer screen, if you were to look at it, maybe even in your hands in print, I don't know if it would have quite worked. So I got rid of that. Um, Try to save it again here. I noticed that there's a bit of a tangent with the upper corner of the T in the Tropes logo, and the Marvel Comics style third level comics thing up there. Our logo, our play on a logo. Again, that's a throwback. I come in and adjust colors, hues a little bit. I thought there was a tangent there with that particular sticky because the line lined up exactly with I don't know what you call it in the upper left hand corner of the box that tells you the issue, the number, the date, the price, etc. So I came back in, I played around with it a little bit. You see, I adjusted the background. The background color was maybe a little bit too purple, and I wanted to make it more neutral. So I played with the background color. I settled on this one finally. I thought this one was just it made the most sense given all the other colors up front. I added the yellow. I wrestled with that one. I turned off the white, the yellow, the white, the yellow. I bet you half of you guys are saying, "No, I should have stuck with the white. Maybe I should have." I don't know. I thought the yellow looked pretty good and kind of made the stickies themselves pop out a little bit more. So yeah. Anyway, this is winding down. I've probably gone on droning for enough time. You'll see the finished image here shortly. I couldn't let go of it right there either. I had to do a couple more corrections. But hey, I appreciate you guys coming in, having a listen, chatting about comics, art, Rob Liefeld, Chris, ComicTropes. Check out the description for the link to our website, howcanahelpyoucomic.com, to Chris's ComicTropes YouTube channel. Again, I really appreciate you spending the time. Hopefully you enjoyed it, learned something. If you can help me learn something, throw a comment in, whatever. It's great. I appreciate it and I hope you have a good one. Thanks.